Yes, please. Yes, please.
All righty.
I think it's on. Yep.
Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to see you all here. Thank you for being with us early this morning for this wonderful forum. I'm Deb Kraus, the president of Eden Seminary, and I'm very happy that we are hosting this praxis gathering around the election time and how to be thinking about our faith in relationship to the threats and challenges and opportunities we face in this election cycle. And we could not have a better panel of colleagues to lead us in that reflection than Reverend Dr. Williams and Reverend Dr. Wise Baker. We are so glad you're here with us. They will be introduced by my colleague, Steve Lawler, who is the outgoing director, the founding director of the Walker Leadership Institute, and who is the sort of this is his brainchild, these praxis cohorts, and bringing together people around important issues such as the upcoming election, the rise of Christian nationalism, how the church is facing its participation in legacies of racism and sexism and heterosexism, and repenting of that and moving into the public square with passion for God's people, for justice for God's people. And so Eden Seminary is completely aligned with that project in our mission. And so this is exactly the kind of programming we are delighted to host. And we're so grateful you have taken time out of your day to be here with us for that. I want to just make one quick announcement. Glenn Connolly, who is a pastor at Webster United Methodist down the street on Bompart, is hosting with a bunch of colleagues, Reverend Russell Ewell, who is an alum of Eden, a worship service on election night. So I just want to give him 1 minute to say something about that.
Good morning, everyone. I am not going to take any time, really. I just want to invite everyone to come to that. So it's at 7 p.m. on November 5th, election night here in the chapel. And our idea is, just as our televisions are telling us, that we belong to one side or the other, we just want to remind everyone that we belong to one body. And if you know the Methodist Church, it's an open communion table, so everyone's invited. We believe God pours grace through that. And so grace might be, what we all need that night. And so please join us, and we'll just spend some time with God and each other.
Whatever the case, we need that grace. All right, Steve.
Well, I also want to welcome you all and say what an amazing couple of people we have to be with us today. So I'm going to start with the Reverend Dr. Dietrich Weiss Baker, who is formerly my neighbor. We used to have, there was a door between our two offices, and on July 1st became the director of the Walker Leadership Institute, which is a huge leap forward. So Dr. Weiss Baker teaches in the seminary, classes about community organizing, classes about anti-racism, and she is active and present to people throughout the community and really throughout the country. So if you haven't gotten a chance to talk with her, I hope you will greet her when we're completed. And then I will tell you, in the strange occurrence of things, I got a text from a friend who said, there's someone new to town and you two should meet. And so that turned into some email and a conversation with Professor Reggie Williams, who came to town to be at St. Louis University as a professor of theology and ethicist, a Bonhoeffer scholar, has some remarkable publications and also some things in the queue. So I hope that you'll get a chance to greet him. And also his partner, spouse, Stacy, is here, and she is an educator and a person who has a great passion for people all ages in systems of education that are exclusive and racist, and particular heart for people who, children who have experienced trauma, the trauma of those systems, as well as the trauma of their lives. So I hope that you will meet her. So I'm just going to go ahead and start where we start. And that's to ask in this particular election cycle, as people of faith and as theologians, what are you thinking about? What kind of sense are you making about what's going on and what I think is easily described as a pretty turbulent election cycle?
Ladies first.
I mean, this cycle and any cycle, I think, as people of faith, we have to ask our question, what is it that we believe about God? And who do we believe God is? And what does God require of us? And so for me, first, it's a theological question in terms of the election cycle. And so I can answer that for me and for the communities that I'm connected to. The first thing is, who do we believe God to be? And if we start with the biblical canon, the Hebrew scriptures, all the way to the early church and the New Testament, there are some people in creation that are pretty clear that the scriptures have an option for the stranger, the foreigner, the poor. And so that's the beginning place for where I'm listening for what is happening in terms of platform and policy, right? And so the other thing that I want to say about that, I wasn't all the scripture, my faith as a Christian, I haven't always been one that understood my responsibility as a citizen, meaning that I have to vote for the Republic, not just for Detra, right? That a citizen means that I'm concerned about the community. I'm concerned about the common good. I'm concerned about shalom and peace, right? I was in the military for a long time, and I'm just being honest. Like, I voted every year based on who said that they were going to make a raise for the military. That was it. That's what I was looking for in the platform. And when I knew who said that, that's who I voted for, right? It was about my personal interests. It was not about the Republic, right? And so I think the shift that people have to make, particularly if they call themselves Christian, or if they examine their values and they find that those values are beyond themselves, then I have to ask, what do these policies and platforms mean for the stranger, for the immigrant, for the poor, And so when I ask those questions and I examine the policies, you can begin to make some assessments and some judgments. And so that's a little bit about where I would start in the conversation.
I think that's brilliant, Dr. Beck. I think that's brilliant. And I think I would say some of the same thing. First of all, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you all for this invitation, for putting together something like this at a time like this. Is hugely important. We are facing a very consequential time in history, one of the most significant moments in our lifetime. And when we think about this moment and putting together events like this, why would we do this gathering here? I mean, of course, you have your ideas for what you mean by this kind of thing. But one might say, to some degree, we're just speaking to the choir here. We're not going to be, we're not here in this moment to change the minds of people online or even to change your minds here. So what for? To some degree, we do these kinds of things to remember who we are. For this moment is frightening. And we need to know who we are as we're heading into this moment. The other thing is, as people of faith, I think we can all confidently say that we once believed this but now we believe this about our faith, that we've had moments of transition and growth. And if you have not, if you are the same person that you were 30 years ago, that's unfortunate. That's just really unfortunate. You know, so which is one of the things that always troubles me when they say this person has changed their mind on that, or you used to say this politician, but now you say this. You know, you're changing your values and so forth, and we can't put our confidence in you because of that. That's just silly. If you have not had much growth in the past 10, 15, 20 years, that's unfortunate. So what does that mean for us? What we see on display in large segments of society today in relationship to this election is a kind of Christianity that is deeply problematic. And if you are not that, what are you? What is our faith? In a moment like this, as a person of faith, that's one of the things one of the things I'm thinking about. How do I describe sin, hope, salvation, God, forgiveness, if it's not that? So that's as a person of faith. Then as a theologian, and a place where we teach this content, how do you describe sin, faith, hope? What are the biblical arrangements here? I mean, the theological, the church historical, at a time when the education system is under such duress. How are we doing this as, you know, as people who are tasked with training people in this moment? So I mean, this is a long answer to the question, but I'm thinking about this, obviously thinking about this quite a bit. You mentioned that I do work with Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I don't need to go back to him because there were people who are his contemporaries who, I mean, Howard Thurman, for example, Benjamin Elijah Mays, you got Zora Neale Hurston, one of my heroes, all these people who are also trying to recalibrate the understanding of human and of Christian from its false and harmful ideals because of the history of human hierarchies. And he's one of them who comes into this world in New York, as I see my book there. As he comes into this world in New York, and he's learning this from Black people, to go back and to think about how to face this problem in Nazi Germany. He's thinking about the way Christianity has been compromised and is failing its moment. So these are the things that as I'm thinking about as theologian and a person of faith. So there's a very long answer.
Thank you both. The springboard for me and part of this then is, and I talked about it in the question I sent to you all about most hopeful, most troubling, but I think you touched on hope. We hear a lot of focus on sin that is personal and is wrapped up in some of the kind of complicated and straying Christianity that shows up in kind of Christian nationalism. I wonder, hope, and where are you most stirred / troubled in this time?
I'm teaching a class this semester called The History of Faith and Social Movements. And we've been studying sort of explicit social justice movements that had, exemplars that were Christian. So we're reading Anne Mingo's book. It's a really great book on Black church women and civil rights movement. We're reading the Catholic Workers Movement. We've been reading Desmond Tutu and the Rainbow People of God, studying Steve Biko and the challenges of anti-apartheid. And what I've been learning as I've been thinking about that alongside sort of the biblical canon is that there is a rhythm to transformation. there's a rhythm to transformation. And so when I'm looking at Steve's life, I'm looking at Dorothy Day, I'm looking at the children in Soweto, looking at the Haitian Revolution, looking at the biblical prophets, there's a rhythm. And the rhythm's something like this, you know. There's some form of inspiration, usually in a form of oppression. So there's some kind of oppressive environment that is in place, and the spirit stirs. And then there's speech and risk. And I've been talking to my colleagues about risk. And then there's transformation, but a risk has to be taken. And one of the folks we've been thinking about and talking about talks about how at the beginning of social movements, in particular, that there has to be a lot of sacrifice, right? This should not sound unfamiliar to the Christian, you know, at the beginning of the Jesus movement and what happened to Jesus and many of the early disciples, or what happened to the prophets, you know, Isaiah sawed in two, Jeremiah stoned, right? Vashti vanished, right? And so there's quite a bit of risk that is involved in the act of transformation. But what is giving me hope and what I begin to see is as more people connect and commit to the work, the risk and the sacrifice that has to be given by those decreases. And I'm hopeful, I think, mostly, that maybe with this kind of political tension, with these kinds of stakes, that people will begin to understand that we cannot continue to have martyrs. We can't continue to have just individuals that sacrifice their lives and their families and their livelihoods often in ways that we could never repay them for these movements, that all of us have to stand up. And it feels to me like people are beginning to get a sense of that. On sabbatical, I created a political action committee called When Black Women Lead, organizing Black women political officials, Black women organizers, Black women of faith. And, you know, I've been organizing for over a decade. You know, I've been doing this for a minute. I've never seen something move that fast. In terms of organizing, I've never had the community respond sort of that quickly and that clearly to a call to build power, to build political power, and to understand. And this was before we knew that Kamala was running. We started 2 years ago, right? So When Black Women Lead started 2 years ago. But then when that came into the race, you know, it energized people. We were like, okay, we're on the right track. We already know that the Democratic Party is not coming to save us, especially not in Missouri. We're very clear that that's not happening. We have to build long-term political power. And so the hope for me is, even with the tension, even with this kind of moment, that people are beginning to hear the seriousness of what they need to build long-term.
So hope is a challenging thing to come by in the midst of so much anxiety. When we think, actually, while noticing that so much of the country is throwing their weight behind a movement that is okay with ethnic cleansing, a movement that is endorsing, politics of hate, division, overt white supremacy, and that is not a deal breaker for large segments of the country. And they're doing that with, faith convictions. Hope is challenging to come by. So it's difficult to think that to talk in that way. And while we see also a rise in far right politics around the world right now, it's challenging to talk about hope. That's my first response to that. In addition to that, however, we also must be very clear-eyed in noticing that we have a Black woman who's been nominated for the presidency as the head of a one of the two major political parties in our country. Could we have even imagined that in 2000, say, in the year 2000? How have we gotten here? This is also true. The books have been written and they can't be unwritten. You can try and ban them, but that's not going to take them out of, out of commission. They are written. You can't unwrite them. The movements have happened. You can't undo them. You are here in a place where people get education, training for ministry in a way that is very different than the kind of Christianity that we see on display in that movement. That cannot be undone. So we have arrived at places where there is a reactionary political movement that's happening, but it is reacting to something that has happened that can't be undone. So there is reason for hope even in the midst of such anxiety. Know where we stand in history. But you also asked the corollary, the concern. The reaction to this kind of progress stands within traditions of Christian thought that are complicit in the most damaging things in world history. You follow me on that?
Yeah.
If it weren't for Christians, and you can finish that sentence with all kinds of things, that you have in history's most heinous moments, you have regularly found Christians on the wrong side of history, motivating those terrible things. If the Christians didn't hate Jewish people and Muslim people, we wouldn't have had the Crusades. If the Christians weren't endorsing the transatlantic slave trade, if the Christians stood against murder, we wouldn't have had we wouldn't have had Nazism, we wouldn't have had the genocide of the first genocide of the 20th century. If the Christians saw clear-eyed, then, but it's not like they're just participating in. In fact, it's often the case that because of their skewed and distorted faith, they are actually the catalyst for some of these things. If the Christians decided that love your neighbor, that things like hospitality were in fact core to their eternal salvation, as it says in Matthew 25, then you would not have MAGA. You wouldn't. But we're not throwing out the faith. We're not throwing away the faith. No, you're wanting to pull it or disentangle it from the teeth of those who would mangle it. And that's why it's important to know where we stand.
I have a particular interest in what are the things people do in their day-to-day to keep going. So you're talking about a series of folks that are in your class, and in each of those instances, the kind of, hopefully for them, experience of the Holy Spirit, the presence of that kind of energy, that kind of refreshment, that kind of reorientation in moments in their own development was there. And when you talk about, pulling it from the mangling and the distortion and the ways that people have used it to be murderous, I wonder if there's anything you could share that's part of your day-to-day that keeps you in that place of doing the work, continuing to call it what it is, to engage it, how it shows up, to teach people to be of spirit and strength in the midst of facing this kind of moment, but also the systems that are represented and in some ways amplified in this moment.
I mean, I think I alluded to it a little bit before, about proximity. It's easy to be, a professor, living in Webster Groves to stay, pretty far from people in our community that are experiencing the most pain and struggle. But God has blessed me with colleagues and communities that I can be connected to. And many of you know I was a chaplain for 15 years in the juvenile detention centers in St. Louis. And that experience and those kids and those families, it ain't never left me, unto this day. On Monday, I was on a call. I think some of you know that Michael Brown Sr. is organizing the parent campaign for Break the Pipeline, the campaign that me and another Eden alumni started with Metropolitan Congregations United over 15 years ago, or 10 years ago. And so Michael Brown Sr. is on the call, and there's a parent on there. And I'll call her Lily, but that's not her name. The parent's on there, and we're organizing other community leaders to come and go support the parents and to reach out to them. And, she gets on there and she's like, look, we need y'all, I'm going to walk with y'all. I'm going to, make sure you have what you need to reach out to the parents so you feel comfortable. But, we're just so blessed that you're here. And, and just to hear her understand that she is a part of making a change, that what's happening to her, because her son is still locked up, she's still going through, but she understands sort of her public commitment, right? That it's not just about my kid, right? But that it's about other kids and other families and other parents. And this lady has 4 jobs. You understand what I'm saying? And yet here she is on the call in the middle of the night. It's late. She's worked all day. And she's on the call, encouraging these leaders to get involved, to take responsibility, and excited about them being a part. That's the kind of proximity that I'm talking about. People that are close to death, people that are walking in the valley of the shadows of death, but that are not fearing evil. She has every reason to give up. Mike has every reason to give up, to be done, to not get on a call and try to help nobody at this point. You know what I'm saying? The system, in some ways, you might say has taken everything. Right? And so it's proximity to people like that. Right? That keep trying to show up, not just for themselves, but for the community. That wakes me up in the morning and makes me start on my way. I've been writing from Ephesians. There's a prayer in Ephesians 3, 14 through 21. I've been praying more than in this season than I prayed. When I was an early Christian in my evangelical, we really serious about prayer. You go through ups and downs. But my prayer life has changed. I have a prayer partner from my church, and we pray on Mondays. And I've been praying through Ephesians chapter 3, 14, 21, and I never heard it this way, but it's a prayer. It's a prayer for power. And y'all know I'm an organizer. But listen to the words I have. I think I brought them with me. So I'm gonna read them to you so you can hear the end of this pericope. Then you will be made complete with all the fullness of life and power that comes from God. Now all glory to God, who is able through God's mighty power at work within us to accomplish infinitely more than we might ask or think. I've always heard that prayer personally, not communally. I've always heard that as a power that God was giving to me, not a power that God was giving to us, right? That God can do more than we have even imagined, right? If we would join together, if we would come together, if we would let the Spirit endow us and embolden us. And honestly, if we would change our proximity to people who have no reason to fight, but keep fighting.
Well, my simple version of it is, what are some of the kinds of things you do to keep your spirit and the spirit active?
Sure, that's right. I was just soaking up what Dr. Baker had just said. I thought that was really helpful. I think one of the things that's challenging in the context of so much anxiety is that it can take up all of your attention. You know, we can sit in the future in our minds and not be able to embody, to be present in our bodies right now. That's a temptation. That's what worry does. It's important to remember that not everything is about that. Not everything is about the future. Not everything is about trying to get this or that thing that we're most, or trying to avoid this or that thing from happening. You can't make the election happen as you want it by yourself. Even no matter what the fundraisers will say on your cell phone when they text you every few minutes, it's not all up to you. So if you, it's important to, I mean, I was just talking about, I like riding my bike. I'm a cyclist. I'm real serious about that. I like my spouse with her work on trauma, which is really, really helpful, has an emphasis on being in nature. You know, it's good to get out, get into nature. Remember the things that settle you in your body first. That's important. The other thing is, you know, in addition to the things that help to allay the trauma and help you be in your body, what are the things or the people whom you love? Don't forget to live and celebrate those things. When it comes to the work itself, because we cannot do this by ourselves, there's no way to do this by ourselves. None of that ever happens in that way. That's one of the problems of the Western idea of human, is that you are an individual. You are not. You are always already connected to people. And one of the things that we must do, and this is what, and when I talk to people about what the theologian, what the ethicist does, I describe it in this way. First, with a medical analogy. You go to the doctor because there's been something in your body, if you're sick, something in your body is not functioning right. And the role of the medical doctor is to enhance, or actually to correct that aspect of your body that is not functioning as it's supposed to make the connections happen as they should, to make it, to optimize its function. That's just it, to put it back into its functional order. Now, the scholar is doing something similar. Connections are not happening as they should. There is disconnect. There is dysfunction in some way or another. We want to restore what is supposed to be, to reconnect as it's supposed to. That is us with each other, us with the earth, us with God, to be able to have each other in healthy, functioning ways and as antidote to dysfunction. If we cannot do that, the life that we have as humans on this planet is shorter. We will be in friction with each other and so forth. So in this moment, we are seeing that in abundance with division. finding those spaces, if you know anything about appreciative inquiry, you find those spaces where the connection is happening really well at this moment too, for your own health. In the communities where you are encouraged, where life is going well, and support each other. And I mean, practically, if you're a friend of mine on Facebook, I do maybe a bit too much Facebooking. But there, it's kind of an echo chamber, and I like to hearing from my friends who are also concerned, and we encourage each other and so forth. But then, moments like this too. This is why I'm not in Europe right now, and I postponed it till Saturday so I could be here with you guys. All of you. I'm leaving to Europe on sabbatical this Saturday. But when Steve asked me about this, I pushed it back so I could be here with you all, because this is important.
Thank you. Yeah, we have about 10 more minutes, and I would love to walk around. And if any of you have a question that you'd like to share, or an observation.
So I wonder if you two could push this whole conversation into the lens of pastor for a few minutes. There was an image, congregational pastor. So there was a group of UCC clergy gathered. I think it's the mic, not me. That they were reflecting on white Christian nationalism. And of course, like we do, we started talking about the people in the congregation and the flags and all that stuff. And we had a good venting session. And then somebody said, hey, we are talking about the people in our pews as them, not us. And it just raises this whole question in this moment of crisis, the opportunities to be both pastoral and prophetic simultaneously. Are our congregations going to blow up, or are they going to miss an opportunity for growth? Those are sort of the ends of the spectrum. What's your vision for the pastor's role in these moments?
Thank you, David.
Yeah, that's good. I was talking to the students a couple of days ago about a reflection that I'm having. Part of the reflection is, and I'm not the church historian here, but I always am thinking about that moment in Christianity when we become the church of the empire. When we decide, we're the official religion of the empire. And I think something happens to Christianity in that moment. That's still happening, right? I think there's still a Christianity of the empire that is alive and well, in which white Christian nationalism sits. I think the confusion often in the pew and in the community is that we think that those things are disentangled when they're simultaneous at the same place and the same time, right? And so one of the questions that I've been reflecting upon is, particularly I'm going to say in white progressive spaces and white Christian churches, if we've had these ideals of justice and anti-racism and these about the poor, and we look at most of our churches, how come there's a big gap in the expression and the realization of those theological claims? We were at a church on Tuesday, right? That has these, right? That has this rhetoric, that has these beliefs, but there's distance, right? In how that has come into being. And so I think one of the ways that pastors can situate themselves is to be repentant and confessional, right? As we move on prophetic journeys, but that's not often where we start, right? In terms of our posture. I have a book with some friends called Preaching Racial Justice. And one of the great Catholic writers talk about the preaching life. And the impetus of that is that before you get up in that pulpit or there has to be a series of transformations that have to come, that are formed in community, that there has to be formation that takes place before you can preach on things or before you can move community into certain places, right? Mm-hmm. And we have not been committed. We're very reactionary, to the moment. when we are not committed to our theological claims in the ways that we need to, with the risks that we need to, with the choices that we need to make on our budgets, and what we choose to teach in Bible study, and what communities we decide we're going to go into. We're not making those choices, but we want to make the controversial choice. And then we are surprised about people's whiplash, about how did we get here when we haven't been here, right? And so that's something I think pastors have to be, and I'm, rowdy as they come, right? But as a pastor, we really have to be about formation, and we have to be honest about the ways that we have not yet been formed, the ways our traditions have not yet been formed or faithful, and approach the community with that humility.
Yeah, I think that's insightful. I think that's very insightful. Did I hear you asking about speaking not just to the community outside the church, but speaking to your parishioners in regards to the divisions that might be in the? Is that what you're saying? In the I got it. No.
Anywhere along that.
Anything in particular? Anything specific?
I think the thing you all talking about that triggered me is that, like what you just said, I could get up there and preach fire and brimstone, and you could get me fired, right? And we didn't move anywhere. Or I could hide in the darkness and think that everything's fine because we didn't actually put on the table the thing that was addressed. So I like where she's going. This election is not the finish line. There's tension. How do we begin to grow together as a community toward that prophetic witness? I'm just wondering what if you were in the pulpit and at the table, what would you be thinking about right now?
As we're talking about this election cycle and from the pulpit. Yeah, okay, yeah. Because my mind went in several different directions, though, and a couple of other different directions. No. I get frustrated. Personally, I'm frustrated when encountering pastors or Christians who have a kind of above it all kind of morality or way of seeing. So they're not going to talk about the contentious, divisive things, but they'll have maybe even a smile as they talk about less challenging things. That if someone then brings up mass deportations and anxiety over that, that's divisive, it's contentious, and they kind of have an above it all kind of. And what do I mean by above it all? Their engagement is, as they present it, is more friendly, more warm, that the faith should help you feel good and then feel good about yourself. But it ends up giving the impression that, faith is all about being nice. Being nice, not raising any division or content. I just don't have any patience for that. There once was a time when perhaps I too thought that maybe that's what we should be about doing. But if your faith is about warm, fuzzy, shiny, happy people, then you cannot help this moment. You cannot help that the prophetic stand against evil that we must be about right now. It's like Warner Sallman's fluffy Jesus knocking out the door with the white glowing light and so forth. You look at that painting and you say, who would crucify him?
That's bold.
What kind of trouble does this guy start that would have everybody all upset? It is a religious justification for apathy and silence. So I would say this: we don't have time for apathy. We do not have any room or time for silence. You got to stand for justice, period. It doesn't mean that you need to be you need to be mean. It doesn't mean that you have to do that, but you do have to. God and justice take sides.
Thank you. I want to honor people's time. I think we're at 9. So I hope that both of you be able to stay around for a bit because I'm sure people want to engage you. I can't thank you enough for being here today and delivering so much wisdom and power and challenge in this moment. And so we do clap, and I would appreciate it if we all did that now. Thank you. You know, I'm here.